Happy Wednesday, everybody! I'm back, and we are just getting to the juicy part of this story. Night at the Monument, Chapter 12. The Coney men were still at dinner at the St. Charles with loaded pistols stuck in their pockets. Swaggles took a seat and told his partners he'd found Billy Brown at a hotel across town. Brown had picked up what Swaggles described as a rattling good pair of bay horses and a three-spring wagon. As soon as Swaggles grabbed a bite to eat, he explained, he'd hurry back to Brown and have him come pick them all up. "Don't have him do that," Mullen gasped. "I thought you had more sense." Swaggles fought the urge to smile. He knew Mullen would react that way, or he'd never have dared suggest that he could deliver a wagon that didn't actually exist. "Go to him and have him keep away," ordered Mullen. "Tell him to drive out to the cemetery at 9:30. Mullen said, "and tie up his team in the woods. Tell him to tiptoe up to the monument and give a quiet whistle near the door of the tomb chamber." Swaggles agreed. "I went off and got some oysters," he recalled. He lingered over the meal, allowing enough time to pass to make it believable that he'd walked back and forth across town. Then he met his partners near the train station. "How is it?" Mullen whispered. "All right," Swaggles said. He'd seen Brown, given him Mullen's instructions. Mullen still seemed nervous. Does he understand perfectly about going up with the team? Yes. Let's get ready and go. Swaggles walked into the Germania house and asked the bartender for his bag of tools. He came out with the bag and they started walking. Behind a building in town, Mullen spotted an axe leaning on a wood pile. He picked it up. They followed the streetcar tracks down the dark road out of town. John Carroll Power was still on duty at the Lincoln Monument. The sun had not been visible during the whole of the day. He remembered, and thick clouds hung like a pall over the earth, making it so dark as early as 6 o'clock that a man could scarcely have seen his hand before him. So pretty much he's saying it was so dark he couldn't see his hand in front of his face. Tyrell and his men jumped out of the wagon in front of the path leading up to the monument. Tyrell paid the hack driver and told him to turn around and drive right back to town, just to make sure that when the Coney men arrived, they wouldn't see anyone near the monument. The team walked up the hill to Memorial Hall. Power let them in and locked the doors behind them. Inside Memorial Hall, the darkness could almost be felt, he recalled. "It was deemed advisable to remain in this room," explained John English, the Chicago Tribune reporter. "If the officers were scattered around the monument, lying among the bush, the thieves were liable to step on them." Power picked up some matches and a lantern and asked the other men to link hands, holding the unlit lamp in one hand and Tyrell's hand in the other. Power led the way into the narrow halls of the labyrinth beneath the monument. The group snaked around several corners, reaching a spot from which no light could escape to the outside. Power struck a match and lit the lantern. He handed it to Tyrell, who continued through the maze to the brick wall separating the labyrinth from Lincoln's tomb chamber. Tyrell told John English to stand in this spot and listen. The reporter thought he was there to get a story, but Tyrell was putting him to work. "Sounds made up in the chamber could be heard here in the labyrinth," Tyrell explained. Imperative silence was demanded, English recalled. The slightest movement produced an echo which might give an alarm. So they're pretty much having to stand completely still in total darkness. I don't know about y'all, but I'm out on that. Nope, not for me. Next, Tyrell lit a series of lamps and placed them along the damp floor of the labyrinth, lighting the way from the back wall most of the way to Memorial Hall. When English heard men at work in the catacomb, he was to follow the lamps out of the maze and report to Tyrell. Each man was assigned his post, Tyrell explained. He pointed Power and the detectives to dark edges of the hall and took the front post himself. It was stationed at the outside door of Memorial Hall to communicate with Swaggles. As the men found their spots, the clap of soles on marble seemed to echo like thunder. "Take off your boots," Tyrell said, "and keep quiet." So now they're shoeless, standing completely still in the dark. Yeah, that's 3 strikes. Nope. He slipped off his own shoes. The men waited in their socks in silence in the dark. Time seemed to pass very slowly, but there was no way to know for sure. "It was not possible for us to consult our watches without danger of revealing our presence to the thieves," Power said. Mullen, Hughes, and Swaggles got to the cemetery about 2 hours after Tyrell's crew. So they had to stand in the dark for 2 hours, y'all. That's crazy. Everything looked good, dark, and silent. Still, to be extra sure they weren't seen, the men walked past the main gate and climbed over the cemetery fence at a spot far from the road. Now, these are the criminals we're talking about now. They snuck to the bottom of the hill on which the monument stood. Swaggles set down the tool bag and pulled out a bullseye lantern. These were the flashlights of their day. The sides of the lantern were solid metal, with just one small glass window for light to stream out in a narrow beam. "Let's go on and take a look around," whispered Swaggles, picking up the axe. Mullen lit the lantern wick and gestured toward the monument. "Is there a bed in there a man would be liable to sleep on?" "I guess not," Swaggles said. "But the old man might be in there reading or writing." "Come on," he said to Hughes. "You and I will go around there." "Hurry up," Mullen said, "and give me the signal if there is anything wrong." Swaggles and Hughes headed up the hill with the lantern. If anything didn't look right, they were to whistle to Mullen. They walked around the dark monument to the door of Memorial Hall. Swaggles grabbed the door handle and shook it. Locked. Inside, Tyrell flattened himself against the wall beside the door. Swaggles lifted the bullseye and pointed a shaft of light right through the door window. "I flashed the light in, but saw nothing," Swaggles later said. "I didn't, of course, want to see anything." Swaggles told Hughes it was clear. Hughes stepped up to the door and had a look for himself. Then they walked around the monument toward the catacomb doors. Tyrell gestured for Power to unlock the door of Memorial Hall. Power put in his key and turned it, but left the door closed. On the opposite side of the monument, Mullen pried open the outer wooden door leading to a catacomb. "How is it?" he asked when Swaggles and Hughes walked up. The two men confirmed they saw no one. Mullen reached into the bag, took out a hacksaw, and went to work on the thick padlock, securing the inner iron gate. It was slow going, and Mullen spat curses as he dragged the blade back and forth. "This was going to take a while," Swaggles saw. "I'll make a check," he said, and walked around to the other side of the monument, only 150 feet from where Mullen was working. Tyrell watched and listened from his spot near the door of Memorial Hall. Now remember, Swaggles is lying here. He tells Hughes and Mullen that he's going to go make a check and make sure there's no one watching them. But really what he's doing is he's going to rat them out and say, "Hey, they're in there." Remember, because he had the secret word. So he goes to the door and he says, "Wash." Tyrell heard the password. He pushed the door open a crack. Swaggles stepped forward. In quick, whispered words, he told Tyrell that Mullen and Hughes were sawing the lock. Tyrell told Swaggles to go back and help them. He wasn't ready to pounce yet, not until the thieves could be nabbed actually handling the tomb. Swaggles walked back to the catacomb door. Hughes had his hands around the padlock, holding it steady while Mullen worked the saw. They were about a third of the way through when the blade suddenly snapped. "A splendid saw," Mullen muttered. He threw down the broken tool and reached into the bag. "They then got a 3-cornered file," Swaggles said, and Hughes held the lock while Mullen filed. They took turns at it. It was very hard and slow work. When Mullen had filed about halfway through the lock, he took out a pair of pliers and grabbed the lock, yanking and twisting until the metal finally cracked. The broken lock fell to the ground. Mullen pushed the gate open and entered the small room. Hughes stepped in with the lantern, followed by Swaggles. Hughes pointed the light at the floor. There it was, the long, white marble sarcophagus. At one end, carved into the stone, was the name Lincoln. In an arc above the name were the famous words of his second inaugural address: "With malice toward none, with charity for all." Hughes and Mullen crouched beside the marble box, feeling the edges for a weak spot in the construction. Swaggles figured this was his chance to slip away. He began backing toward the door. Mullen told him to wait. He was needed inside. Hughes held the lantern out to Swaggles and told him to stand in the corner, out of sight of the door, aiming a beam of light at the sarcophagus. Swaggles glanced at the open door, then back to the Coney men. He considered making a run for it, but thought of the pistols in his partner's pockets. He played his role perfectly so far. This was no time to panic. He took the lantern. Mullen couldn't find an easy way into the sarcophagus. He'd have to crack it open, either with his axe or the gunpowder in his bag. He tried the axe first, lifting it above his head, preparing to slam the blunt end down on the marble lid. "Hold on," Swaggles said. Mullen stopped. "If we can get the lid off," suggested Swaggles, "we can put it on again and it won't be known that the coffin is gone." Was Swaggles really worried about damaging the sarcophagus? Or did he just want the job to take as long as possible, so he'd have time to slip away? He never explained. Anyway, Mullen agreed to try and pry the thing open. He slid the axe blade under the lid and pushed down on the handle. The lid came right up. He and Swaggles lifted the slab off the box and leaned it against the empty crypt, reserved for Mary Lincoln. Beneath the top slab was a second, heavier marble lid, cemented to the box below. They began hacking at the cement seam with the axe and chisels. Dun, dun, dun. So, they are almost in. They've got the outer layer of the box, what they're calling the sarcophagus, which is like the outer layer, off. The lid is off. And now they're chipping at the next box, which is put in cement. So it's going to be a little harder to get that one out of the box. So chapter 13 will be tomorrow, and it's going to be called Devilish Work. Maybe we'll find out what happens. Bye.